My name is Emma Carter, and this is the story of how I faced the tempests of life, not once but twice, and found a flicker of light amidst the darkness. I have learned that grief can carve hollows in your soul, but it is in those hollows that resilience takes root, fragile yet unyielding, like wildflowers pushing through the cracks of a frostbitten stone. When I was a girl, my world was a quiet idyll in the small English town of Willowmere, nestled in the rolling hills of the Cotswolds. Our home, a modest stone cottage with ivy clinging to its walls, was filled with warmth. My father, Thomas Carter, was a journalist whose typewriter clattered late into the night, crafting stories that gave voice to the voiceless in our little community. His passion for truth was a fire that never dimmed. My mother, Clara Carter, was a nurse at the local hospital, her hands gentle but steady, her smile a balm for every scraped knee or fevered brow. Together, they wove a tapestry of love that made our simple life feel like a dream I thought would last forever. But dreams, I learned, are fragile things. I was 9 years old when the first storm struck, on a December night when the air was sharp with frost and the stars hid behind a veil of clouds. My parents had gone to a gala in Oxford, where Father was to be honored for his investigative work exposing corruption in the county council. I stayed behind with my grandmother, who smelled of lavender and told tales of knights and dragons by the fire. We were laughing over a cup of cocoa when the telephone's shrill ring cut through the warmth. I didn't understand the words, but I saw grandmother's face drain of color, her hands trembling as she clutched the receiver. Her muffled sobs told me what my heart already feared. Something had shattered beyond repair. The news came like a blade. A drunk driver, reckless and unseeing, had veered across the icy road on the A40, crashing head-on into my parents' car. Mother was gone, snuffed out in an instant, her laughter silenced forever. Father survived, but the accident crushed his legs, confining him to a wheelchair for the rest of his days. I remember the hospital, its antiseptic smell and sterile white walls, a stark contrast to the chaos in my heart. Father lay motionless in his bed, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow with a grief too vast for words. "Emma, I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice a broken thread as his trembling hand reached for mine. I didn't understand why he apologized, it wasn't his fault. But as I grew older, I realized he wasn't sorry for the crash. He was sorry for the life he feared I would now endure, a life marked by absence and struggle. In the days that followed, I found a folded letter in the pocket of Father's coat, crumpled among the hospital's sterile linens. It was in Mother's handwriting, penned in her careful looping script. "No matter what happens, Emma, keep your heart strong." Those words became my talisman, but they also haunted me. At 9, I was too young to grasp their weight, yet they burrowed into my soul, a constant reminder of the strength I wasn't sure I possessed. Each night, I'd trace the ink with my fingers, as if I could summon Mother back through her words. I wanted to be the brave girl she believed in, but all I felt was a gnawing emptiness, a fear that I'd disappoint her memory. Father, though broken, refused to surrender. From his wheelchair, he threw himself into his work with a ferocity that both inspired and frightened me. His articles grew sharper, exposing injustices with a clarity that made him a quiet hero in Willowmere. But I saw the cost, the way his hands shook when he thought I wasn't looking, the way his eyes lingered on Mother's photograph above the fireplace. For me, he tried to keep life normal. We'd spend evenings by the hearth, reading Austen or Dickens, his voice steady even when his heart was not. Yet, no matter how tightly we clung to routine, there was an ache in our home, a void where Mother's laughter used to be. Inside, I wrestled with guilt. Was I enough to fill the space she left? Could I be the daughter Father deserved, or was I too weak, too small to carry the weight of her absence? Mother's letter burned in my mind, a challenge I feared I'd never meet. Little did I know that this was only the first storm, and the skies above me were already gathering for another. Where in the world are you listening from? Drop your country in the comments, we'd love to know. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I highly recommend you do it right now so you don't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just stories, they're deep life lessons, the kind you'll probably recognize from your own experiences. So stay with us, there's so much more to come. Grief, I've learned, is not a wound that heals cleanly. It lingers, a quiet shadow that trails you through the years, whispering doubts when you dare to hope. Yet it was in the shadow of my mother's absence that I began to see my father's strength, not as a distant ideal, but as a living force that shaped me. Thomas Carter, confined to his wheelchair, refused to let the accident that stole Clara define him. In our ivy-draped cottage in Willowmere, his typewriter became a weapon, hammering out articles that exposed local injustices with a clarity that made our small Cotswolds town hum with respect. His resilience was my anchor, but it also deepened my fear. Could I ever be as unbreakable as he seemed? Father poured his love into me, filling the silences where mother's voice used to be. Evenings by the fire, we'd debate the morality of Heathcliff or parse the politics of Trollope, his eyes alight despite the weariness etched into his face. He urged me to join the village book club, to chase dreams beyond our stone walls, but I clung to him, afraid that leaving would mean losing the only parent I had left. Mother's letter, "Keep your heart strong," sat folded in my bedside drawer, its ink fading but its challenge ever present. I wanted to honor her, but strength felt like a cloak too heavy for my shoulders. When I turned 18, Father insisted I apply to university. "You must carve your own path, Emma," he said, his voice firm but warm, his hands squeezing mine across the breakfast table. I hesitated, my heart tethered to Willowmere, but his belief in me was a tide I couldn't resist. I chose to study literature at King's College London, trading the rolling hills of the Cotswolds for the city's restless pulse. London was overwhelming, its cobbled streets and ancient spires both thrilling and isolating. I called Father nightly, recounting lectures on Shakespeare or the peculiar taste of coffee from the campus cafe. "You're soaring, my girl," he'd say, and I'd cling to his words, hoping they were true. It was in a cramped lecture hall during a seminar on Keats that I met James Harper. He was a postgraduate student in urban studies, with a warm laugh and eyes that held a quiet steadiness, like the Thames on a still morning. James worked part-time in logistics, coordinating deliveries across the city, his hands calloused but his manner gentle. We bonded over shared cups of tea in a Bloomsbury cafe, trading stories of our lives. I told him of Willowmere, of Mother's letter, of Father's unyielding spirit. He spoke of growing up in a noisy Bristol household, raised by a single father after his mother passed. His openness disarmed me, and for the first time I felt my guarded heart soften. Love crept in slowly, like dawn breaking over the London skyline. James was my light, chasing away the shadows I'd carried since childhood. He didn't flinch when I shared my fears of losing those I loved, of failing to be the daughter mother envisioned. Instead, he listened, his hands steady over mine. One rainy evening, he showed me a small wooden box he kept hidden in his flat, filled with mementos, a pressed flower from our first walk in Hyde Park, a ticket stub from a West End play we'd seen on a whim. "These are us," he said, his voice soft but sure. The box became our secret, a tangible proof of a happiness I scarcely dared believe in. When James proposed on a frost-kissed morning by the Serpentine, I said yes with tears in my eyes. But I made one condition clear: I can't leave Father. He needs me. James smiled, his breath visible in the cold air. "I'd never ask you to. We'll build our life together, all three of us." We married in a small chapel in Willowmere, the pews filled with villagers who'd watched me grow. Father, despite his wheelchair, insisted on wheeling himself down the aisle to give me away. His proud smile, framed by the chapel's stained glass, was a moment I'd carry forever. We settled in a spacious flat in Camden, London, where Father had his own room overlooking a tiny garden. Life felt complete, James's laughter, Father's stories, our shared dinners under the glow of fairy lights. But beneath my joy, a quiet fear gnawed at me. Happiness, I'd learned, was fragile. Each time James left for a late-night delivery job, I'd clutch Mother's letter, whispering her words like a prayer. The wooden box of mementos sat on our dresser, a reminder of what we'd built but also of what I could lose. I wanted to believe in forever, but the memory of that winter night in Willowmere, the night Mother was taken, lingered, a warning that storms could strike without warning. I couldn't shake the dread that this light, this love, was too delicate to last. And though I didn't know it then, the skies were already darkening, gathering for a tempest that would test me in ways I never imagined. Love, I've come to understand, is both a sanctuary and a risk. It builds you up, only to leave you vulnerable when the ground beneath you crumbles. For a fleeting moment, I believed I'd outrun the shadows of my past, those cold nights in Willowmere when loss first marked me. With James Harper by my side, his laughter filling our Camden flat, I dared to hope that happiness could be mine. But the fear I'd carried since childhood, the dread that joy was too fragile to hold, was a prophecy I couldn't escape. The second storm came, and it tore my world apart. It was a bitter February evening, the kind where London's streets glistened with sleet and the city felt like it was holding its breath. James had been called out for an urgent delivery job, coordinating a late-night shipment across the M25. I hated those calls, the way they pulled him from our warm kitchen where we'd been planning a spring holiday to the Lake District. "I'll be back before you know it," he said, kissing my forehead, his coat still damp from the rain. I clutched Mother's letter that night, her words, "Keep your heart strong," a mantra against the unease twisting in my chest. But no prayer could stop what was coming. The phone rang at 2 a.m., its shrill tones slicing through the silence. A police officer's voice, calm but heavy, delivered the news. A lorry had skidded on the icy motorway, crashing head-on into James's van. He was gone, killed instantly, they said, as if that softened the blow. I sank to the floor, the receiver slipping from my hand, the world blurring into a haze of grief. My heart, already scarred from losing Mother, felt like it was unraveling. Father found me there, his wheelchair creaking as he reached for my hand. "Emma, I'm here," he whispered, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. He was my anchor, the only thing keeping me from drowning in the abyss. The days that followed were a fog of funeral plans and condolences. We buried James in a quiet cemetery on Hampstead Heath, under a sky as gray as my heart. I stood by his grave, clutching the wooden box of mementos he'd kept, our Hyde Park flower, our West End ticket stub, feeling like I was burying half of myself. Father stayed by my side, his presence a silent promise that I wasn't alone. But grief is a solitary beast, and no matter how tightly I held his hand, I couldn't shake the question gnawing at me. Why did I let myself love, knowing it could end like this? Then came Margaret Harper, James's mother, and her daughter, Sophie Harper. They arrived unannounced at our flat, their designer coats out of place against the worn charm of Camden. Margaret was a woman of sharp edges, her lips pursed as if perpetually displeased. Sophie, younger and colder, had eyes that flicked over me with disdain. They'd never warmed to me, their disapproval clear from the moment James introduced us. A journalist's daughter and with a disabled father? Margaret had once muttered, as if my life were a stain on their family's polished reputation. Now, with James gone, their true colors emerged. They wanted the house, the terraced home in Camden that James and I had bought together, its walls filled with our dreams. "It's only sensible, Emma," Margaret said, her voice dripping with false sympathy as she stood in my living room, eyeing Father's wheelchair with barely concealed contempt. "This place is too much for you now. Sell it and we'll handle the rest." Sophie smirked, adding, "You don't need all this space, do you?" "But not with your situation." The word situation landed like a slap, a pointed jab at Father's disability. I felt my blood boil, but grief had left me brittle, and I struggled to find my voice. Then came the betrayal that cut deeper than their scorn. During a heated argument, Margaret's composure slipped. "James should have listened to me," she snapped, her eyes blazing. "I told him to rewrite his will to keep this house and the family, our family. But he was too stubborn." The words hit me like a dagger. James had defended me, even against his own mother, and she'd tried to erase me from his legacy. My heart splintered, torn between the pain of her betrayal and the love I still felt for James. Part of me wanted to collapse, to let their cruelty win. But another part, the part shaped by Mother's letter, by Father's resilience, stirred. I couldn't let them take what James and I had built. That night, alone in our bedroom, I opened the wooden box, tracing the ticket stub with trembling fingers. I saw James's smile, heard his voice promising we'd always be a family. But doubt gnawed at me. Could I fight Margaret and Sophie, women who wielded wealth and influence like weapons? Was I strong enough to protect Father, to honor James's memory? Mother's letter lay on my nightstand, its words both a comfort and a challenge. I wanted to be the woman she believed in, but the weight of loss and betrayal made me question whether my heart could bear another battle. As I stared out at the rain-soaked streets of Camden, I knew the storm wasn't over. It was only beginning. Grief can hollow you out, leaving you a vessel for pain, but anger, true righteous anger, can fill that hollow with fire. After James's death, I was a woman adrift, clinging to the wreckage of a life we'd built in our Camden flat. Margaret Harper's revelation that she'd tried to convince James to cut me from his will lit a spark in me, but it was a fragile one, threatened by the weight of doubt and loss. Mother's letter, with its faded call to keep my heart strong, sat like a silent judge, urging me to rise. But could I? Could I face Margaret and Sophie, whose disdain for my father's disability and my modest roots felt like a verdict on my worth? The answer came not from within, but from the echoes of James's love, guiding me to fight for what was mine. I couldn't do it alone. A colleague from my university days recommended Laura Bennett, a London solicitor known for her sharp mind and unshakable calm. Laura's office in Bloomsbury, with its oak-paneled walls and shelves of leather-bound law books, felt like a sanctuary amid my storm. I poured out my story, the accident that took Mother, Father's resilience, James's death, and now Margaret's audacity. Laura listened, her pen poised over a notepad, her eyes steady. "We'll start by securing your legal standing," she said, her voice a lifeline. "If James left a will, it's our best defense." I nodded, but doubt gnawed at me. What if Margaret was right? What if James had wavered under her pressure? The search for the will took us to James's office, a cluttered space in a logistics depot near King's Cross. Amid stacks of delivery manifests, I found a locked drawer in his desk. My hands trembled as I used the spare key he'd hidden in our wooden memento box, the one holding our Hyde Park flower and West End ticket stub. Inside was a sealed envelope, addressed to me in James's careful handwriting. My breath caught as I opened it, Laura standing quietly beside me. The will was simple but clear. I, James Harper, bequeath all my possessions, including our Camden home, savings, and assets, to my wife, Emma Carter, and her father, Thomas Carter, whom I cherish as my own. Tears blurred my vision. Even in death, James had chosen us, defying his mother's schemes. But the weight of his love also deepened my guilt. Had I been worthy of such devotion? The true revelation came days later, when I powered on James's old phone, its battery barely holding a charge. I was searching for photos, a fleeting connection to him, when I stumbled on a voice memo dated months before his death. My heart raced as I pressed play. James's voice filled the room, warm and resolute, speaking to a friend. "Emma and her father are my real family. Mother's been pushing me to change the will, to keep everything in the family, but I won't let her hurt them. They're my home." The words struck me like lightning, rekindling the spark Margaret had nearly extinguished. James had seen me, truly seen me, and his faith lit a fire in my chest. I played the recording for Laura, who nodded, her eyes glinting. "This is more than sentiment," she said. "It's evidence of intent. Margaret's claim won't stand." Courtroom in the Royal Courts of Justice was a world away from Camden's cozy streets. Its vaulted ceilings and polished wood benches loomed over me, a reminder of the stakes. Margaret and Sophie sat across the aisle, their tailored coats and haughty expressions a stark contrast to my simple navy dress. Father was there, his wheelchair positioned beside me, his hand a steady anchor. Margaret's solicitor argued that the house was Harper family property, claiming I was merely a caretaker. Sophie's cold stare bored into me, her lips curling as if my presence offended her. I felt the old doubts creep in. Was I strong enough? Was I betraying Mother's letter by faltering? But James's voice echoed in my mind, urging me to stand firm. Laura presented the will, its words read aloud with quiet authority. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, studied the document, her glasses catching the light. Then came the recording. As James's voice filled the courtroom, I watched Margaret's composure crack, her hands tightening on her handbag. Sophie whispered furiously, but their defiance wilted under the weight of truth. The judge's ruling was swift. The house, the savings, all of it belonged to me and Father as James intended. The deceased's wishes are unequivocal, she declared, her gavel a final note in our victory. Margaret and Sophie rose, their faces a mask of fury. Margaret paused at the door, her eyes locking onto mine. "You'll regret this, Emma," she hissed, her voice venomous. Sophie's glare was colder, a promise of future battles. But as they swept out, their heels clicking on the marble floor, I felt no fear, only relief. I protected what James and I had built, not just a house but a legacy of love. Father squeezed my hand, his smile weary but proud. "You've done it, Emma," he said, and for the first time I believed I had. That night, back in Camden, I sat by the window, the city's lights a soft glow against the rain. The wooden box lay open before me, its mementos a bridge to James. Mother's letter rested beside it, its words no longer a challenge but a truth I'd begun to embody. I'd faced Margaret's betrayal, Sophie's scorn, and my own doubts, and I'd won. But the victory was bittersweet. James was still gone, and the house felt emptier without him. Yet in the quiet I felt a shift, a spark of resolve that hadn't been there before. I wasn't just surviving, I was fighting for the life we dreamed of, for Father, for myself, and for the love that still burned within me. The storm had passed, but I knew the skies could darken again. With James's voice in my heart and Mother's letter as my guide, I was ready to face whatever came next. Grief is a tide that ebbs and flows, never truly leaving but softening with time, like waves lapping at a weathered shore. After the courtroom victory over Margaret and Sophie, I returned to our Camden flat, the silence heavy with James's absence. The house, once a canvas of our love, now felt like a museum of memories, each corner holding echoes of his voice, his laughter. Father's presence and my mother's letter, urging me to keep my heart strong, were my anchors, but I wondered if strength could ever mean more than survival. Could it mean hope? The answer came in the unlikeliest of ways, a quiet miracle that would redefine my purpose. Weeks after the trial, a wave of exhaustion and nausea gripped me. First, I blamed the stress, the sleepless nights, the weight of defending our home. But a faint intuition, like a whisper from James, led me to a pharmacy on Camden High Street. In the dim light of my bathroom, I waited, heart pounding, for the test to reveal its truth. 2 lines appeared, stark and undeniable. I was carrying James's child. Tears fell as I sank to the floor, a tumult of emotions, grief for the father who'd never hold his child, joy for the life growing within me, and fear of facing this alone. Father found me, his eyes softening as I showed him the test. "Emma, this is a gift," he said, his voice trembling. "James is still with us." Pregnancy became my compass, guiding me through the fog of loss. I began a journal, its pages a love letter to my unborn child. "Your father was sunlight," I wrote, "and your grandfather Oliver is a warrior of the heart." Each entry was a vow to keep James alive, to weave his spirit into the stories I'd tell. Father and I turned to the garden behind our flat, a patch of earth James had dreamed of filling with color. We planted his favorite flowers, roses and violets, their petals a quiet rebellion against sorrow. As I knelt in the soil, hands dusted with earth, I felt James's dreams take root alongside the blooms. The garden became our sanctuary, a place where love endured. The birth of my daughter, Clara Harper, named for my mother, was a moment of transcendence. In a London hospital, as dawn broke over the city, I held her, her tiny eyes mirroring James's so perfectly it stole my breath. She was his legacy, a piece of him that death couldn't claim. Father stood beside me, tears tracing his weathered face. "She's our miracle," he said, and I knew he was right. Clara's every giggle, every curious glance, was a reminder that life could begin anew even after the darkest storms. One spring morning, as I tended the garden with Clara asleep in her pram, a letter arrived, its sender anonymous. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but its words shook me. A colleague from James's logistics firm revealed that he'd once planned to build a small library in Willowmere to honor Father's work as a journalist. Project had been a secret, a dream James never shared. My heart ached with love and loss, but also with purpose. I resolved to make it real. With the insurance money from James's policy, I funded the library, a quaint stone building in our Cotswolds hometown. At its opening, villagers gathered and Father's name was etched above the door. Clara, toddling at my side, clapped as if she understood. In that moment, I transformed pain into a legacy that would outlive us all. Through this journey, I've learned lessons that I carry like lanterns in the dark. First, love is eternal, living on in the choices we make and the stories we tell. Second, resilience isn't the absence of fear, but the courage to move through it. Third, family is not defined by blood, but by those who stand by you in the storm. Fourth, every loss holds the seed of renewal, waiting for us to nurture it. Finally, our pain can become our purpose, a bridge to something greater than ourselves. These truths guided me from grief to hope, and I share them in the hope they light your path too. As I watch Clara play in our garden, her laughter mingling with the London breeze, I know James is with us in every rose, every page of my journal, every book in that Willowmere library. My heart, once fragile, is now strong, not because I am fearless, but because I've learned to carry love through the storms. If this story touched you, please support our channel for more tales of courage and renewal. Subscribe, share, and join us in celebrating the human spirit's unbreakable light.